All right, so let's start by talking about the effect of humans on our environment and on our ecosystem, right? So, when we talk about the effect of humans have obviously various effects, uh, or they have affected the environment in various different ways, right? So, one of the ways, the different ways that have altered the environment. One is obviously farming. When we talk about farming, so you can talk about your farming of your obviously you're going to be talking about the farming of your crops, right? Your wheat, barley, your tomato plants, whatever, right? Then we also do animal farming, we do fish farming, we raise poultry, we raise cattle. All of this comes under the category of farming. And farming has been one of the you can say reasons, or one of the main reasons that has affected the environment. And we are going to go ahead and study exactly how that happened. Okay, we're going to study how did that happen. How did um how did humans through farming manage to affect the surrounding environment. Along with that, humans also contributed significantly to pollution, whether that is air pollution, or it is air pollution, whether it is water pollution, whether it is sound pollution, whether it is through acid rain, doesn't matter, right? And then we have also significantly contributed to deforestation, right? So we are going to go ahead and take a look at all of these one by one. Let's start by talking about agriculture, because agriculture has, in variety of different ways, the agriculture has affected our ecosystem. Farming, agriculture has significantly affected our ecosystem. Let's discuss how. Okay. So when we talk about our agriculture, as you know, farmers used various methods to increase the yield of the crops being produced. Right? That's quite simple. They are going to use, you do use it. Farmers have got different methods that they use to increase the yields of the crops being produced. They can do this in a variety of ways. For example, if I just give you an example, using fertilizers, right? That is one way of increasing the yield of the crops. Later on, when we do the topic of, or you might have done this, when you talk about genetics and variation, you must have studied about natural selection and um, artificial selection, right? So again, they by selective breeding, they try to increase the yield of the crops. They use fertilizers, they use various other things to try to maximize how much crop they are getting, right? Let's discuss this. Let's discuss what are the farmers exactly doing that is increasing the yield of the crops, and how is all of that possibly affecting you and me. Okay, let's see. Let's talk about our first factor. Okay, the first factor, that we are going to talk about is the ions inside the soil, right? We had a similar discussion previously as well. And in that discussion, we were solving a question, if you remember, you and me, and we were talking about the nitrate ions and the magnesium ions and the potassium ions and their effect on the growth of the plants. So obviously the ions inside the soil are significantly important. Now, how are the farmers controlling it? What are they doing to try to uh, control the ions that they find inside the soil? What are they doing to obviously make things better for themselves? So what they're basically doing is that they are adding fertilizers, right? Fertilizers are a really good way of providing nutrition, of providing nitrates, adding nitrates into the soil. Now, um, and obviously, when we talk about why are the farmers doing it, so obviously the reason you want to do this, why are the farmers doing this? They are doing it because the nitrate ions are needed to make proteins, right? They need the nitrate ions. They need the nitrate ions to make proteins, right? And help the plant build new tissue. So if the plant has to grow, if the plant has to build new tissue, then it has to do so with the help of nitrates, right? Now, this is one of the ways that, like I said, the your farmers are using. So one of the things that the farmers are using to obviously help them out with the nitrates is that they are adding fertilizers. Later on in the topic, you and I are going to study about how fertilizers, even though they're helping the farmers, even though they are technically benefiting us in one way, I mean, they are benefiting us because they are helping increase the yield of the crops that you and I obviously are eating, right? So they're helping to increase the yield of the crop. But but while helping us out, it is also significantly harming our environment. So this is the first thing that we're going to discuss. How are fertilizers affecting the our environment? Okay. Now, another thing that the farmers often do is that they have to they have to alter the structure of the soil. Okay, they have to alter the structure of the soil. That is another thing that they have to do. So to alter the structure of the soil, why do they need to alter the how do they alter the structure of the soil? By plowing, right? When they are plowing through the fields, right? What are they basically doing? They are trying to break up the soil. They're trying to separate the soil particles from each other. They're trying to break up the compacted soil, right? Um, they are so that is one way that they are altering the structure of the soil. Now, why do they need to alter the structure of the soil? Why do they need to do plowing, right? Because it allows for aeration. It allows for the air to basically incorporate in the soil, and excuse me, it allows for drainage. But again, this is something that can prove harmful for our environment. Then, farmers are also altering the pH of the soil, right? So how do they alter the pH of the soil? They can alter the pH of the soil by basically they add lime to it. Okay, what is lime? Lime are basically your calcium salts, calcium carbonate, right? They are your calcium salts. So they add calcium carbonate, they add calcium salts. Now, why are they using calcium salts? This will make a bit more sense to you when we do our when we do chemistry. Okay, but just to go over the chemistry aspect of it, you might have studied, we haven't done it yet, but you might have studied previously that your metals are basic in nature, right? Metals are basic in nature and non-metals are acidic in nature. Meaning that if you have calcium carbonate, then calcium carbonate is going to be um, basic in nature. It's going to act like an alkaline material, right? In an acid-base reaction, it's going to act as the alkali, as the base. Non-metal oxides or non-metals in general are acidic. So carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, they're all acidic in nature, right? So they can add calcium carbonate salts to decrease the pH of the soil. And again, this is really, we can both understand why the pH of the soil is important, right? The pH of the soil is important for the optimum uptake of minerals, to ensure that the minerals are taken up like as best as possible. We need to ensure that the pH of the soil matches, right? And obviously the pH also has an effect on the enzyme activity. Now, all of these methods can, while the farmers are using them to try to increase the yield of the crop, they can have an adverse effect on our environment. They can lead to possibly in damaging our environment, right? Now, let's talk about, let's start by talking about our how these factors are injuring or harming our environment. Okay, soil structure and soil pH are not significant. The fertilizers are very significant. Okay, yes, you're altering the structure of the soil, you're altering the pH of the soil. That does have an effect on the environment, but the effect is not that significant as compared to fertilizers. Fertilizers have a very, very, very significant effect on how our environment is currently being damaged. Now, when we talk about fertilizers, okay, just give me 1 second. So when we talk about fertilizers, there can be two types of fertilizers. Okay. So the two types of fertilizers that we can possibly have are organic and inorganic. What are organic and inorganic fertilizers? So when we talk about organic fertilizers are basically made from the waste product of animals, specifically the feces of animals. Okay. So that's basically known as manure, right? If you ever look into gardening or farming, they use it as manure. So the feces of animals are basically the feces of animals are basically the ones that are considered as organic. What are inorganic? Inorganic are basically the chemical salts. Okay. So chemical salts that are usually made in the industrial scale. So for example, ammonium nitrate, right? or ammonium nitrate or potassium nitrate, both of these, especially ammonium nitrate, is used very, very, very commonly as a fertilizer because it provides a lot of nitrogen, a lot of the nitrate ions that are needed for the growth of the plants, right? So we can have two types of fertilizers. Okay. Now, when we talk about how the fertilizers, um, when we talk about um, now when we talk about how the fertilizers are affecting our environment, how are these fertilizers possibly harming our environment? So we can link the role of fertilizers to our second point over here, pollution. Fertilizers are the main cause of eutrophication. What is eutrophication? Eutrophication is a form of water pollution that happens because of excessive use of fertilizers. Okay, so it's basically a form of water pollution. What is going to actually happen in this process? Let's discuss how eutrophication actually happens. Right now, eutrophication can happen because of fertilizers, and it can also happen due to untreated sewage. Okay. Major cause are fertilizers, but it can also happen due to untreated sewage, right? Now, when we talk about eutrophication, what actually happens in this process? Okay. Due to rain, okay, due to rain, the um, the nitrate ions are easily leached out, okay, because of frequent rains, right? Because of frequent raining, because of the plowing of the soil to break up the soil, right? And deforestation. Deforestation actually helps prevent the leaching out of nitrate ions. Trees actually help prevent the leaching out of nitrate ions. By causing deforestation, by plowing the fields, and because of rain, what happens that the nitrate ions can be easily leached out of the soil. And as they get leached out of the soil, they can easily collect in large bodies of water like lakes and ponds. Now, how could these fertilizers possibly be harmful, or how could these fertilizers possibly be bad? Okay, the reason they are so, how do they end up actually harming the area? They end up harming the lake or the ponds by causing a rapid growth of algae, right? Algae are microscopic plants. The fertilizers cause a rapid growth of the microscopic plants called algae. This is known as algal bloom. Okay, we call it the algal bloom. They actually grow so much that they cover the entire surface of water. The entire surface of water gets covered up by these plants. Okay. Now, what happens? What happens? How can this be bad? Again, how can just the plants growing all over the surface of the water possibly be bad? The reason it is bad is because they eventually die. right? Obviously, at one point, these algae are going to die. And as they're going to die, they will be decomposed by the bacteria aerobically. They will be decomposed by the bacteria aerobically, right? A lot of your bacteria actually respire aerobically, and hence they will use up the oxygen in the water, whatever dissolved oxygen. So when you talk about aquatic life relies on dissolved oxygen, the oxygen that is actually dissolved inside the water, right? Along with this, the algae also block the light from reaching the bottom of the lake or pond. Now, the light cannot actually reach the bottom of the lake and the pond, right? So first thing is first, they're going to die. As they're going to die, the bacteria will decompose them, and in the process, they're going to start using up the oxygen in the water. Now, you can say, Miss, okay, fine, but how much oxygen honestly can bacteria use? But the process doesn't stop over there. The bacteria are going to die. Yes, they are going to get decomposed. But because of the constant algal bloom, it's not like it's just a one time thing. The leaching is happening constantly. The algae will die, you'll get new algae. Algae will die, new algae will grow, right? Because what's going to happen? So the algae is going to make a layer on top of the water of the on top of the lake or the pond, and as a result, it is the light is not going to be able to reach the bottom. Okay. Now, what happens that the plants at the bottom of the lake or pond, right? The plants that are at the bottom of the lake or the pond, they are not going to receive any sunlight. So they will not photosynthesize. They will not be able to photosynthesize. Hence, less oxygen is produced. So we have got these bacteria that are constantly using up the oxygen. And keep in mind, it's a constant process, right? It's not like the plants are growing and then they die and it's finished. No, the algae are going to grow, they're going to die. You get new algae, then they'll die, and new algae, and then they'll die. Why are we getting constantly so much algae? Because of the fertilizers getting leached. Okay, so what is going to happen that the algae is not going to let the light reach the bottom of the plant. So as a result, the plants that are inside the water, they are not going to be able to photosynthesize, and hence less oxygen is being produced. So we have the bacteria that are using up the oxygen, and the plants that were supposed to replace that oxygen cannot photosynthesize. So eventually what is going to happen that there is a decline in the oxygen concentration. As a result, other aquatic life will start to die. So initially, maybe it might just be, small organisms. It might be small organisms who could not withstand the change in oxygen and they might die. But it's a vicious cycle if you see it like that. So what happens is that once the animals are going to start to die, so let's say initially the small animals die. Again, since the animals will be dying, there will be more decomposition. More oxygen is being reduced. Oxygen levels will continue to decrease. And uh, it's going to decrease, right? Then what is going to happen that larger animals will start to die. As larger animals will start to die, again, the amount of you can say oxygen is going to decrease even further because decomposition is going to worsen. Eventually you can reach a point where the water becomes anoxic. Anoxic means there is no oxygen, barely any oxygen left, right? And it is also it also becomes incredibly smelly because the bacteria are producing methane, they're producing hydrogen sulfide, right? So oftentimes, if you ever go to a small pond and it's covered in algae, it often smells really bad. This is the reason. So this is how fertilizers are harming our environment. Keep in mind that untreated sewage is also a cause, but the but the major cause is your fertilizers, right? So this is one of the ways of how our environment is being harmed due to the is being harmed due to our farming. I hope you're following me so far. Anything that's not clear, any point that you want me to go over again?
No. Second.
Yeah. Okay. It's pretty general, a lot of this, right? Okay. So another major thing that is currently being done, and that again can affect your environment, is pest control, right? So for pest control, when we talk about pest, right? A pest would be any insects, any parasite that is, it doesn't have to be just, by the way, an insect. It can be a plant. It can be an animal. It can be a bacteria. It can be a fungi, or it can be a protoctista. It can be a virus. Doesn't matter. Anything that is harming the plants can be considered a pest. Okay. There are two ways to control the pests. The first way is obviously to use pesticides. The second way is known as biological control. Let's take a look at both of these one by one. If we talk about our pesticides, so pesticides can be of various different sites. Okay, pesticides pesticides can include herbicides. So, like I said, a pest is not necessarily an insect. A pest can be any plant as well. Anything that is harming our crops is considered a pest. So, for example, a weed can be considered as a pest. So, herbicides are the ones that are specifically going to attack plants. Then we can have insecticides. Insecticides are the ones that are going to be specifically targeting our insects. We can have fungicides. Fungicides are going to be targeting any fungal organism that is harming our plants. And we can also have molluscicides. Molluscicides are, if you remember your topic of classification, you might have studied that mollusk is our snails, right? So snails, slugs, leeches, they're all considered to be under the mollusk category. So obviously, the molluscicides are specifically going to be targeting these organisms. Now, let's talk about, so pesticides. When you talk about pesticides, right? Pesticides are easier to use. Okay. They are easy to use. We have a wide variety available. If I want to go specifically after an insect, I can find that specific insecticide that targets that exact insect, right? They're easy to apply, they are easy to use, and they're very effective. But as you would expect, there are a lot of problems associated with pesticides. What are the different problems that are associated with pesticides? So when we talk about problems, there are various different problems that a pesticide can have. Okay. One of the major problem that it can do, so when we talk about pesticides, another advantage of pesticide is that it is quite specific, right? I mean, if I have a pesticide against a specific insect, for example, against spiders, it is not very likely to damage other plants. It's not very likely to damage, a fungus growing nearby. It's only going to target those spiders. So pesticides have the advantage that you can usually make them pretty specific, right? And they can also be cost effective. But when we talk about the problems, they can cause various problems. One problems that can obviously happen is that they are slow to decompose. Hence, they can persist in the environment. And obviously, that can prove to be harmful because the pesticide will stay within the soil for quite a long time. So that can be quite harmful for the environment. Then the second point is a point that you and I have discussed previously as well. They can build up in between the trophic levels, which is known as, if you remember, we did a question on it, bioaccumulation, right? Then we can, not only can they build up, they can become more and more concentrated along the food chain, which is known as biomagnification. And they kill other insects that are harmless. So if you remember, I had given you a example where I had said that we have an insecticide that specifically um has been made for, let's say, spiders, right? Now, it is specific in the sense that it is only going to target spiders. But again, if we talk about spiders, it might possibly, there are different species of spiders. There's some species of spiders that prove to be quite helpful. There are some species of spiders that are more dangerous, right? So, for example, a black widow, yes, you would want to get rid of someone like a black widow. But if you talk about a normal garden spider or a jumping spider, they are usually not just harmless, they're sometimes quite beneficial as well. So, that is another disadvantage associated with pesticide. Now, when we talk about an ideal pesticide, okay, an ideal pesticide technically should be cost effective. It should be biodegradable. It should be specific, meaning that it will only target the intended organism. It should not bioaccumulate. It should be easy to apply. It should be easy to store, all of that. Now, let me explain to you, or let's go over a little story. Not a long time ago, in 1900s, right? In fact, up till I believe 2000s, like 2005 or 2006, maybe something like that. So from 1900s into early 2000s, there was an insecticide that was quite um, well known, and it was used quite commonly. That insecticide was DDT. Okay, the full form is dichlorophenil trichloroethane, right? So you don't have to learn the full form. but it's dichloro trichloroethane. Okay, so it's basically an organic compound. It was literally, it was an insecticide, and it was used a lot. Like when I tell you, Viraj, it was used a lot specifically to target mosquitoes that were responsible for spreading malaria. Okay, so like one of the prevention for malaria is that you can kill the mosquitoes that are responsible for spreading it, right? The Anopheles mosquito. So they were killing those mosquitoes using DDT, and they were also using it to kill lice that were responsible for carrying typhus. Okay. Then around, I believe, 2000s, it was banned, like in the entire world. They just banned it and it was not used anymore. So let's talk about why was DDT banned. Again, you don't have to know the answer specifically related to DDT. Okay. The reason I'm talking about DDT is because it's a very common example that is often mentioned in textbooks. It simply helps you understand the problems that I just told you. All of these problems were seen with DDT. So it's just a way of like a case study, right? A way of understanding how all of these problems happen in real life. So the thing is that DDT was extremely persistent, right? So it would literally remain active for many, many, many years, eh, like a decade easily. It would not degrade even for like 10 years down the line, right? Then what would happen is that when it would break down, when it would eventually decompose, it would produce toxic compounds, right? And on top of that, DDT spreads easily with the help of wind and all that, right? Because they're spraying it. So it would spread through the wind. And scientists have actually, um, when they've collected the samples from the polar caps and from the deserts, they've found traces of DDT all the way at your northern and southern polar caps. So DDT so it spread worldwide, like everywhere, because it was being carried everywhere by wind. But now there's another problem that I did not mention that DDT caused, right? That problem is this: the pest can become resistant to the pesticide. That's also a problem. And that is something that happened with DDT, because it was being used so widely, because it was being used so much. The insects eventually developed a genetic mutation that made them resistant to it, right? So you have studied, you must have heard about natural selection. We're going to study that too. So what would happen is that they developed a genetic mutation that made them resistant to the insecticide. Now, obviously, what happened that those mosquitoes that had the resistance had a advantage over those mosquitoes that were not resistant. The resistant mosquitoes had adapted, right? They now had an advantage. They had a better chance at survival compared to the non-resistant mosquitoes. Obviously, natural selection happened. And what happened that since the resistant mosquitoes had a greater advantage, greater chance of survival, so their numbers increased drastically. And when they reproduced, they passed on the resistant gene to the next generation. So that resistance spread out until nearly all of the pest had developed resistance to DDT. Not just to DDT, we now have there are literally hundreds of pests that are resistant to different insecticides. Like that's how much they have become resistant. They're resistant to various different insecticides, right? Then DDT didn't just kill the pest; it would kill any type of insect. For example, butterflies. Butterflies would die, right? Then your bees, your they would damage the bees and the butterflies. And because they were damaging bees and butterflies, they were actually disrupting the food chain. How were they disrupting the food chain? Think about it, that let's say that the butterfly is eaten by a wasp, right? Wasps are predators. So what would happen is that since the butterflies were dying because of DDT, the wasp would have nothing to feed on. And as a result, the number of wasps were also affected. So not only was it directly harming, it was also indirectly harming. Okay. That is another point to note down, that it can disrupt the food chain. Pesticides can disrupt the food chain. So when you're answering your question in like your past papers, or when we're discussing questions like this, so this is another point that you can think of, that maybe whatever pesticide they're talking about can also indirectly affect the numbers of other insects by disrupting the food chain. Then it led to something really, really important, and that is your bioaccumulation and biomagnification. We did a question related to this. Okay. Now I am going to go over it with you in a bit more detail and explain to you exactly what it is about. Now, what happens is that let's make a food chain. We have microscopic plants which are known as plankton. The plankton are eaten by crustaceans. We did a question that was quite similar to what I'm about to explain. Crustaceans include lobsters, crabs, prawns, shrimps. Those crustaceans are then eaten by fish, small fish. That small fish is then eaten by larger fishes. Right? And the large fish is then going to be eaten by, let's say, an eagle. Now, what actually happens is this, that over the food chain, we see something which is known as bioaccumulation. What is bioaccumulation? DDT is not broken down. This insecticide was not broken down. Okay. Not only was it not broken down, not only was it not broken down, it would persist. Okay. It would accumulate in the fatty tissue. So, for example, the plankton has somehow or the other been exposed to DDT. So, what would happen is that the plankton, the DDT would not break down. It would not break down. Okay. The body simply does not have the enzymes that are needed to break it down. As a result, it would start to collect and it would start to store in the fatty tissues. Specifically, fatty tissues are where we see this happening, that it starts to add up, it starts to build up inside the fat tissues. This is known as bioaccumulation. Okay, where instead of breaking down, instead of the being digested by the body or destroyed by the body, it starts to collect inside the fatty tissue. That is known as bioaccumulation. So bioaccumulation was one thing that we were seeing. Now, along with bioaccumulation, what was happening, that we were seeing something known as biomagnification. What was biomagnification? Biomagnification is that if we talk about one crab, okay, one crab is not going to eat one plankton. One crab is going to eat maybe thousands of planktons, right? One crab is going to eat thousands of planktons in its entire lifetime. Then that crab is going to be caught by the small fish. Again, one fish is not going to eat on one crab in its entire life. It's going to maybe eat like hundreds of crabs, right? Then, when we talk about the small fish is eaten by the large fish. Okay, so that large fish is again not going to just survive on, one small fish. It might eat again, it might eat maybe like 50 fishes in its lifespan, in its entire life. Or not just in its entire life, maybe just in 1 year, right? Then the large fishes are eaten by the eagle. Again, an eagle is not going to feed on just one fish. An eagle is going to feed on at least 10, 20 fishes. Now, see that not only is the DDT accumulating, it is bioaccumulation is simply that it's not breaking down, it's collecting, staying inside the organism. Okay. Your but your biomagnification is that the concentration of the DDT is increasing. Concentration of DDT, oops, what happened? Increases each trophic level. This is known as biomagnification. So let's say that the concentration of DDT was very small, 0.0005. Okay. Now, when it was the thousands of planktons were eaten by the crustaceans, so inside the crustaceans, it came up to 5%, right? Then that becomes 500%, and so on and so forth. By the time you reach the eagle, the concentration has increased quite significantly. Okay, so this is known as biomagnification. Biomagnification is when the concentration of the insecticide is increasing between each trophic level, and bioaccumulation is when it is simply building up in the organism and not exiting the body. So this is another possible harmful effect that we see with our pesticides. Making sense? Any part that's not clear? Anything that you want me to go over again?
No.
Okay. Now, the second point that we have to take a look at is biological control. Okay. Let's talk about what exactly is biological control. Like, what does one mean by biological control? Biological control is when you use another organism, use of another organism to control the pests. So when you use another organism to control the pests, that is known as biological control. So how can you, there are various ways that you can do this. You can do this by introducing a natural predator. Right? So what does that mean? That, for example, there is an insect that is known as aphid. Okay, you might have heard of it. Aphids are known for damaging plants by sucking the sap. So they actually suck the sap out of the trees, and they damage the plants in the process. Ladybirds are the natural predators of aphids. So you can introduce ladybirds into your farmland, right? They will naturally feed on the aphids, and you can control the number of pests in your farm. A good example of this is that if you have a bunch of rats um, terrorizing any area, you can introduce cats, which are their natural predator. So that is one way that you can do that. Then, um, then if the now if the pest is a plant, then you can introduce a herbivore. Okay, if the pest is a plant, like I said, pest is not necessarily an insect. It can be a plant as well. So if the for example, if I give you an example, uh, I don't know. Okay, so I had read about this quite some time back, but there was this certain cactus that was becoming quite a problem in Australia. Okay, like in the grazing land where the cattle would eat the grass and everything, this cactus was becoming like widespread. So what they did was they introduced a moth. The moth was a herbivore that ate that specific cactus and hence control its number. Then you can introduce a parasite. An example of a parasite that you can possibly introduce is a wasp, right? So you can use a wasp. Then you can introduce a pathogenic microorganism.
Wait, I
So
had a question.
yes, go on.
You know, like the pests, right?
Yeah,
They
go on.
they're like the organisms, right?
Yes,
That those organisms are like plants and animals, right?
yes.
Okay, so like, do they harm only the plants or as well as the animals, like the insects?
No, we are talking specifically related to plants, that they're harming the plants. Okay,
No,
so
but in general.
yeah, but they you this can apply to animals as well. They can apply to animals as well. Yes, if you're specifically in growing a cattle and a bacteria is or a disease is spreading through the cattle, so technically we wouldn't consider it to be a pest. A pest is a term that's used specifically related to farming. Okay, pest is a term used specifically related to farming, but when you talk about animals, so in animals, generally this does not apply. Yes, there can be diseases that can spread around. There can be some, ticks, or there can be some parasites that can possibly harm them, but we don't consider them to be pests. Okay, pests are a term that is specifically used only for plants. But the same concept can apply to animals as well. Like all of these things, the bacterias, the ticks, insects, they can harm animals as well. But usually, we don't call them pest in that case. Pest is just specifically used for plants. Okay, so for biological control, you can introduce a pathogenic microorganism. That is also something else that we can do. So, for example, uh, in Australia, right, they were having an issue with the rabbit population. The rabbits were growing exponentially, like uncontrolled numbers of them. So they deliberately introduced a virus that was specific to rabbits to bring their population down. Then another thing that farmers can do for biological control is introduce sterile mates. This is something that's not easy to do, but it is done, right? Since the males are sterile, there will be no offspring, so the numbers will fall. But again, this is something that's not done very commonly. The best thing that you can do is introduce a natural predator. The first point, introduce a natural predator. Then if the pest is a plant, then you can introduce a herbivore to eat on that plant. Or you can introduce a parasite, or you can introduce a microorganism. Okay. So all of these are ways of biological control. So there are two ways to control your pest. You can either use pesticides or biological control. Obviously, you can see with biological control, while it is safer for the, again, when it comes to biological control, introducing a natural predator. So the thing is that in this topic, you need to think a lot. Okay. If we think about how is introducing a natural predator can go bad for us, so it will disrupt the food chain, right? I mean, if there are no ladybirds in that area and I suddenly bring ladybirds in that area, it is going to disrupt the food chain. right? That is going to have an effect on the other organisms and possibly the population, community, and maybe even the ecosystem. Same problem with introducing a herbivore, right? The problem with herbivores again is that it is not specifically going to eat on the plant that is bothering us. It might feed on other plants as well. Then introducing a parasite, same issue. That parasite, for example, I give you the example that wasps are often used, like to control the population of flies, your fruit flies and all that. So the wasps, again, they're going to disrupt the food chain. If there are no wasps in that area already, so if you introduce a completely new species in an area where there were none of them before, then obviously they are going to um, disrupt the food chain, right? Then on top of that, they're not just going to harm just one insect, those wasps are going to be harming other insects as well. Microorganisms, same problem. Microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, they can always mutate. And they can develop a mutation that will allow them to infect other species as well. So all of these are again, so in questions like this, you always have to think. So while all of them using a biological control has a lot of advantages in the sense that you're not harming the environment around you, but again, you can possibly still all of these can have drawbacks that can lead to disruption of food chain, that can lead them to developing mutation, harming other species, and having an effect on the ecosystem. So pesticides has its own advantages and disadvantages. Biological control has its own advantages and disadvantages. But both of them can possibly be harmful for the environment. Neither one of them is the optimum way to go, but both of them can be harmful for the environment. Pesticides obviously can have quite significant effect if they're going to um, can have quite significant effect. The biological control method, on the other hand, yes, if there is no bioaccumulation or biomagnification, but these can also possibly disrupt the food chain. So it's all about pros and cons, right? Which one is better? Which one do we go for? Which one is, about weighing the benefits against the harm and then seeing what we should go for. So this is related to your pests. Now we're going to go ahead and stop it over here for today. And then our next class, we're going to take a look at air pollution and deforestation. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Viraj. I'll see you in the next class then. Have a good day.
Bye.